Hi long range hunting, welcome to episode 37 of our terminal ballistic testing, hunting versus match bullets. Now this is one of the most requested bullets I have ever had. I mean, ever since they announced this, it's been a daily occurrence, people asking me about these bullets. So they are very hard to get, and we're talking about the ELD-VTs from Hornady. These have been really hard to get a hold of. No place has them in stock. A buddy of mine had some and was nice enough to donate a box. I ended up buying 2 more boxes on top of that. So Jacoby, thank you so much. I really appreciate that for the box. And then I just got these in today. I bought a box of the ELD-VTs for reloading. So I really appreciate you helping out, bud. I just want to give you a shout out and say thank you again for this. And let's dive into the design of these bullets. Now, anytime I do testing, I like to reach out to people and study it. I want to know as much about the bullet as possible. With regular bullets that have been around for a while, there's a lot of data out there. You do have to kind of sift through it. Sometimes I'll contact the manufacturer. It just really depends on what's available, who I know that's used it, etc. But anytime I go to do anything, I like to do a lot of research into it. Now, with a brand new bullet like this that just hit the market, that made it a little harder because there's very little data out there, period. So I reached out to a buddy of mine, Robert, who's connected to Hornady. He knows a bunch of those guys. And so I contacted him, said, hey, who should I talk to? He said, hey, Jaden is the guy to talk to. He's the head ballistic expert there. And so I ended up getting a call from Jaden, really nice guy, really knowledgeable. We had a really great conversation, probably 40 minutes on the phone. And it was nice too because he was about to leave for his weekend, but he didn't mind, hanging out and talking to me and giving me the breakdown of these bullets. So let's dive into the design of these because it's very unique. Now, Hornady's purpose in designing this bullet was they wanted a match grade varmint bullet. A lot of the varmint bullets are super lightweight, they're super short, so they don't have a great BC. The external ballistics is not great. So they wanted something with the profile of an ELD match with great external ballistics with the terminal performance of something like the VMAX, which is a very explosive, energy dumping bullet, which is what you want because with varmints, you have very little depth of penetration of the animal. You have low impact resistance, so you want it to be explosive and not require a lot in order to open up. They wanted this for both short range and long range. They wanted that profile, but also at a higher velocity to extend range. And so this is what they created. Now let's dive into the different parts of how it was created. I cut one of these open just to study it. I've also looked at the pictures, and so we're going to dive into all this. Now, as you can see, there is a very large cavity in this. And it was strange because normally a cavity like this actually helps in terminal ballistics. If you look at the Burger hybrids, stuff like that, that cavity in there actually helps with terminal ballistics and more reliable expansion. But this cavity is much larger. I measured these at 0.4 of an inch, almost half an inch. So it's a long bullet with a massive cavity in it. And how these bullets work. So let's actually look at a regular ELD match or A-tip or that type of projectile. If you look at here, you can see the core goes through the entire projectile. And there is just basically a nice hole where that tip is set. But as soon as that tip impacts its target, that tip is being forced backwards and instantly connecting with the core. So you have two mechanisms of expansion. You have that tip going backwards and forcing that core open. It's almost like a wedge when you're splitting wood. You put the wedge in the crack and you hit it and it opens that wood up. Does the same thing. And then the edges of the jacket around, as those open up, if it catches any material, that'll help peel it back. And so those are your two mechanisms of expansion. Now, tip bullets are great. They have the large cavity to allow for massive and rapid expansion, especially at lower impact velocities. They're better at angle impacts. You have higher BCs with the larger cavity because that tip is in there. So there's a lot of pluses in why I really like tipped projectiles and why I was excited about this. Now, the actual design, though, does lead to some problems. I was really surprised, and so was Hornady, they said, that this actually, I was expecting a much lower impact or minimum impact velocity. A lot of us were speculating this could be a great subsonic round, or even going below what the ELD match can expand at and giving us a really nice, long range bullet for bigger game. However, the way this bullet works, that cavity is actually counterproductive to that. And so timing, Jaden stressed this a lot, timing of how fast that's going and how fast it collapses is critical to it. But it actually has a minimum impact velocity of 2,000 feet per second. Now, let's look at the ELD match. The ELD match will expand down to 1,300 feet per second. So, it's significantly higher. We're looking at between 600 and 700 feet per second higher as far as this bullet. And it's kind of weird, and it wasn't expected, but what happens is because that cavity is so large, and in order for this bullet to expand, once there's the impact on the tip, that cavity has to collapse backwards until that tip, or the back of the tip, connects with the core and forces expansion. And so it has to be done very fast. It has to collapse and meet that. If it doesn't, it won't perform right. And that's why it has such a higher minimum impact velocity than what was expected. Now, this also leads to problems. Now, if you notice, the weight is to the rear, and this is done specifically for gyroscopic stability. Now, if anybody's hauled a trailer behind their truck, you know that you put the majority of the load in the front of the trailer. That way it's stable. If you put it in the middle or the back, it'll actually wobble and it won't be stable on that trailer. With bullets, it has to be to the rear. That's the trailer version of being forward. So you couldn't have that weight in the front or the middle. It had to be to the rear. And so the whole purpose in that core is just sliding it all the way to the rear to make sure you have gyroscopic stability. So that's the whole reason. They wanted that longer profile with the lighter weight, but they're limited on how much core they could put in it. And so the flat edge or the size of the cavity had nothing to do with terminal ballistics. It was all about just getting the weight right and getting it as far back as possible to have gyroscopic stability. And that leads to some of the problems that we're seeing. With the weight being on the back side of it, it does cause problems of if you go below the minimum impact velocity, what's going to happen is that bullet is going to hit and it's not going to collapse quite right. It can end up bending the tip over if it doesn't collapse. And if it doesn't collapse fast enough, what's going to happen is it's going to hit and then it's going to start to tumble immediately because the weight is back here. And so it's going to hit and the weight is going to be forced forward. Now, the problem is I've seen some results of that happening even at higher impact velocities to where because the cavity is so large on the nose of that bullet that as it's crumpling down, it's actually bending. It's not going straight back like it's supposed to. So that can lead to issues and it instantly tumbles. And tumbling is a bad thing. You do not want tumbling. And so what's happening is that tip is getting bent and that bullet's either penciling through or it's tumbling instantly and doing funky things in the body you don't want. So timing is very critical and making sure that projectile, the nose, collapses straight back so that tip meets up with the core So it definitely sets some limitations as far as how it goes terminally. And it's weird because it does have a lot of limitations. Now, this also, I talked about impact angle. A boat tail hollow point match type bullet, even with a cavity, angles are not your friend. So if you have too much impact angle, if it hits right or a little bit, what's going to happen is it's going to be forced back, it's going to open up. But if there's too much impact angle, what's going to happen is that same thing, the tip can get bent and it's going to end up start tumbling. So boat tail hollow point style bullets are more temperamental and more sensitive to impact angle. A tipped projectile, however, like the ELD match or A-tip or a TMK, does not have that problem, because even if it impacts at an angle, because of the shape of that cavity and the fact that it instantly connects with the core, even if it's at a little bit of an angle, it's still going to be forcing that backwards and it's going to force expansion. However, these bullets, because of that cavity, act like a boat tail hollow point on too much impact angle, and so you're actually losing some of the benefits of a tipped projectile with how large that cavity is with this bullet design. So let's move forward and dive into the testing now that we've talked about the design. Now let's get to the testing. Now I did 3 tests with this. A total of 4 bullets that I shot for this test. One is with a ballistic gel squirrel, one is with a rabbit, and one is with a ballistic gel block. So let's go ahead and watch those real quick, and then we'll get back to you here and talk about the results. Alright guys, today we are testing out the new ELD-VT, the varmint bullet from Hornady. Interesting results so far from what I've heard. I just shot them for accuracy wise, shot them both at 100 yards for groups, and then took it out to 414 yards. We're doing a varmint test today, so obviously I got a little varmint here. This is a squirrel, which is much larger than an actual squirrel, and the reason I picked this is because the thickness of it is actually about what the average coyote is going to be, and obviously, you know, with a squirrel, the tail's not made of gel. So this thickness of what it's going through is going to be right around the standard varmint, bobcat, or a coyote kind of thickness. And for a broadside shot, that's what we want to see. So we're going to try to catch it in this. We'll see how it does. We're starting off at almost point blank range today, and we're going to see what it does. So let's have some fun. All right, we're looking in the catch block. You can see there's the bullet right there. Impact velocity was 3,300 feet per second. So we'll dig that out, but it fragmented very early. Really came apart. You can see what it did in there. We'll get the measurements and all that back at home, but definitely worked, at least for high velocity. All right, now I've already shot this with a 6mm, same gun, with a 110 A-tip. You can see the nice large cavity in there, did a lot of damage. But we're gonna see what this does from nose to ass as far as how deep it's gonna penetrate. This is very high velocity, so you know, this is not the typical impact velocity you're gonna have, but I wanted to see how it does just with everything. I start high and then I work my way out to low. And we'll cover more about the bullet in the house as far as all the specifics and everything and why I'm trying to do everything I'm doing. So let's get to it and let's see what it does to this little rabbit. Now, we're back. Let's look at these results, and we're going to start just as we started with the squirrel. Now, I did have a camera malfunction, and so I did not get the first shot on there. I did get the second shot, however, and so I shot it again just a little bit above. The nice part is about this is you can see I have two perfect wound cavities right next to each other, so I can compare how they performed. So it was almost identical. It was a little bit different in size, just barely, but not a whole lot. So with the squirrel, the different measurements, if you take the length, both had a length of 5 inches of that cavity. It opened up pretty much immediately on both of those and went through. It both had 5 inches. Now, interesting enough, the width of the cavity, the main width of the cavity was, the top one was 2.25 inches or 2¼ inches. The bottom cavity, though, was 2.5 inches as far as its width. So very similar, you know, but there was a slight difference in there. Now, if we go over to the rabbit, on the other hand, the rabbit I shot into, I had already shot that once with the 110 tips, but I still wanted to do it. I still had plenty of room in that to move up, so I actually shot it in the face. Now this one opened up immediately. If you look at the face of it, I mean, as soon as it hit, it opened up. All of these were done at 3,300 feet per second impact velocity. My muzzle velocity was 3,336 feet per second. That's why I set up so close to get as high a velocity as possible. The reason I do that is that's your maximum potential. The most energy transfer, the most wounding that you're going to get is going to be there. So I wanted to see how it do. And there's also a maximum impact velocity. So I want to try to find that and see what impact velocity range we can do this with and where is it going to fail. So if we look at this one, because it is longer than the squirrel, and that squirrel, honestly, you know, a real squirrel is smaller than that, and it's not made of ballistics gel. Lower impact resistant animals like that are not going to have that same type of wounding, just because that's actually more equivalent to what you'd see with something like a coyote. So with the rabbit, I shot it straight on. I shot it right above where I shot it with the A-tip. Length of the wound cavity was 4.5 inches. The diameter on this one was 2 inches, which was smaller than the other ones. And it went a total of 9 inches before that bullet stopped. Now, if we go to the next gel block, this is an actual FBI gel block. And if we look at this, it had about 1/4 inch before it opened up. The length of the main cavity was 4¼ inches. The width of the cavity was 2.5 inches, and it went a total of 8¼ inches before the bullet stopped. So very similar. There are some little bit of changes in there as far as how it went. Let's dive into how they performed energy-wise, which was very shocking for me. I really didn't expect this. So if we look at it, the squirrel, it opened up pretty decent. There wasn't a whole lot there as far as how large the cavity was. It wasn't really that telling. It did expand and open up. The gel block was honestly pretty pathetic as far as how it did. It was a really small energy transfer even at that high velocity. And then if we look at the rabbit, and I want to do a comparison here of both the FBI gel block and the rabbit, because I've shot other bullets into those. If we look at them, there's a huge difference. So if we look at the rabbit, here is the ELD-VT, and we can see that energy transfer. It was only for the first part of the rabbit. And you can see there's an okay cavity there for the temporary wound cavity, the energy transfer. And then here is a 110 A-tip out of the same gun, but it was at 2950 feet per second impact velocity. So slower. We're dealing with 350 feet per second slower with the 110, but the energy transfer was massive. Well, look at that. I mean, it just turned the entire rabbit into a blob, something that if Ghostbusters saw that, they would be calling me and showing up. I mean, it turned it into a ghoul. It completely obliterated the entire form of this rabbit. and it was massive. So, you know, that 110 really dumped a lot of energy. It penetrated further into the rabbit. Whereas in the same gun with a higher impact velocity, the ELD-VT was pretty pathetic next to it. If we look at the gel block itself, you can see there is the ELD-VT wound cavity, and then here is the 110A tip, which the 110A tip is an improved version of an ELD match. So, you know, massive, massive difference in the type of terminal performance we're seeing there. So I'm actually pretty surprised with that. Now, something to look at here is the 4 bullets that I recovered. Now, a lot of people want to know weight retention, stuff like that. At 3,300 feet per second, that's pretty fast. It's going to open up, and these are designed to rapidly open up. Now, the first bullet had a remaining weight of 15.4 grains, which is 19.25% of the full 80 grains. The second projectile was 20.3 grains, which was 25.3% of the original weight. The third bullet was 19.3 grains, which is 24.1% of the original weight. And the fourth and final bullet was 19.9 grains, which is 24.8% of the original weight. So averaging that out, we had a weight loss of 77% at 3,300 feet per second, with a retaining weight average of 23%. So they really did shed a lot of weight. Now, something I want to point out here, if you look at these bullets here, is you can see the actual back of the bullet. You can see it right there, and you see that it is mushroomed. A lot of people think when they talk about fragmentation that it's just blowing up, that it's instantly just blowing up and coming apart. And that is not even close to true. How these bullets work, and the reason that bullets like ELD match and stuff are able to transfer so much energy, is that bullet is actually expanding, and it's the edges that are breaking off. So what's happening is it's giving you the maximum amount of displacement from the size of the bullet mushroom, and then as it grows till it's too large, those edges are breaking off and moving forward, creating their own wound channels. And so that bullet's shrinking slightly, and as it continues to expand, it grows until it sheds off, shrinks, grows, and it's shedding the entire time. Now, these do it at a very rapid pace because all these bullets are expanded, but these are to the point where it's right up. There's really no more bullet to expand. So this is very, very close, if not the top tier of how fast we can push these bullets as far as terminally wise for something that's larger. So they don't blow up or just fragment and come apart or disintegrate like a lot of people think. No, they're actually expanding, and they're continuing to expand and shed until it runs out of the bullet. So when there's no more bullet to expand, it's not going to be able to continue. It's going to stop momentum and stop in the body, or exit if it still has enough energy and velocity to do that. So these types of bullets are made to dump everything they have inside of the animal. Now, like I said though, these, for some reason, I don't know if it has to do with the cavity or what, they do not transfer the same type of energy as, you know, something like an actual ELD match. I don't know if that has to do with the timing or what. I'm going to still test these a lot, but it was very interesting on how they behaved and looking at the bullet, studying all that. So moving forward, it's going to be interesting to test them in the field. So overall, something I do want to point out though is these ballistic gel tests are great. They are a great way to mimic tissue. It's a great way to test and compare bullets. But the place it does fall short is when it comes to varmint-style animals. When you start getting into the smaller stuff, the impact resistance on the gel is more like from a deer up. So for big game or for humans, that's roughly what your bullet's going to do. However, when you get into the smaller animals, it's a very different story. So this is the equivalent of what would happen if we hit something like a white-tailed deer or something like that, mule deer, whatever. So if I actually hit a coyote with this velocity, it would be a little bit different. Now, you know, depth of penetration is very short on coyotes. Bobcats also, they're very tiny. If you look at, you know, ground squirrels, stuff like that, there's not a whole lot. So the gel does give us an idea, but it's not quite the same. It's going to be a little bit more than what you're going to see in, you know, an actual varmint. Now, I do have some friends that have been testing these and have been able to get a hold of them, and I'm also getting mixed reviews from them in the field. Some it's, you know, great, some it's not, and it's kind of one of those things. They've shot coyotes and stuff to where it's been great, especially frontal shots. Frontal shots have been very explosive, but the broadsides, on the other hand, are where a lot of people are having the problems. So it's one of those things that, you know, what you hit, how much resistance, and, you know, they've gone out to about 430 yards on them. So it's kind of one of those things that I'm not going to make a know-all assessment on this. I'm going to test them. I want to hunt with them. I want to see how they do. I know how they're performing in gel, and I'm also going to take them out at lower impact velocities in gel and study those and continue this. That's why, you know, I bought bullets and I've got these reloads so we can really test them. As far as the external ballistics of it, this is a group, you know, first group I shot out of it, really, really tight groups out of my 6 Creedmoor, you know, super accurate rifle. And I ended up taking out to 414 yards, and it did all right. The one thing I did notice, though, is even though it does have a higher BC, it is lighter weight, and even though it has more velocity, BC will always win out. And so I was shooting the 110A tips next to these, and, you know, I was having at 414 yards between 7 and 8 inches more wind drift with these 80 grain bullets, even though they were going faster. So, you know, you are going to have more wind with these than something like if you run an ELD match or an A-tip. So it'll be very interesting to continue to test these. I'm really fascinated with them. I'm not a big fan of some of the limitations of them, quite honestly, but there's no perfect bullet out there. There's always going to be pros and cons, you know, and every bullet has limitations. So it's an interesting thing to study and look at, but I'm going to continue to do this. If you guys have any comments, drop them in the comment section below and I'll try to answer them. And we're going to continue with this, so stay tuned. But everybody be safe out there. Happy hunting.
Hope you enjoyed this video, and make sure to hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and turn on notification bell so you won't miss out on any future video, and happy hunting.